This is Jenny Kunkel, and in this video we are going to take a look at how to retrieve data from two or more tables. We'll be using some of the slides from the Murach SQL Server 2022 slide deck. Some of them have been altered, and we are going to be explicitly focusing on inner joins in this video. When we look at the syntax for an inner join, notice that we have our select with our select list. So this is going to be a list of columns that we select either from table 1, from table 2, or table 3. So we could just focus in on selecting the columns from one of the tables, or we can select columns from a combination of two of the tables, or we could select columns from all three of the tables. When we specify our join conditions, we have our table 1, and it doesn't necessarily matter which table we specify as the first table, but we're going to join this using an inner join. And this is an optional keyword, but this week we want to code out our inner join to cement into our brain the difference between what we'll be doing with the inner joins versus when we get into the left, the right, and the full outer join later on in other videos. So we have our inner join. This is going to join table 2 to table 1 based off of one or more columns in the first table equal to one or more columns in the second table. Now in this case, if table 1 is represented as the first circle and table 2 is represented to the second table, then we have the intersection of those two tables. That's kind of what an inner join is based off of that join condition. Now, of course, relational databases are based off of relational calculus, and everything that we're going to be doing is essentially based off of set theory. So we can look at these diagrams, but we don't have to necessarily understand a whole lot about the math involved. But it gives us a little visual, especially as we get into the right and the left and the full outer, that gives us an idea of what we're actually selecting from the tables. Now, as we go into SQL Server Management Studio, we will be using the NorthWinds database. Let me just go ahead and minimize the system. And we are going to be using database diagrams. If I right-click on the database diagram node, it's going to give me an option to create a new database diagram. If for some reason I have some type of an error that pops up, I'm going to go ahead and close this and remove my tab here. I can go up to NorthWinds, do a right-click, new query. This is going to give me the option that I can put in something and execute it. In our case, we want to execute a stored procedure, even though we've not talked about stored procedures. Stored procedures are essentially a combination of script items that we can run from the database. And this is going to be something that can change our database ownership. And if we execute the stored procedure, we specify that we need to execute it. And then we would specify what the stored procedure is. In our case, this is going to be sp change db owner. We should see it pop up in the dialog. And then we can do the SA for our user that we want to run it against. We can highlight that and then execute. And then that's going to change our ownership. After we do that, and I'm just going to come back up here and get rid of this, we'll be querying, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave this open. I can come over to my node. I should be able to do the new database diagram. When I do that, click on that node to add the database diagram. It's going to ask me what tables do I want to add to my database diagram. When I do this, I want to add the employees. I want to add the employee territories, and then I can scroll down and select the territories. Now I can do this using my control key or the standard selection options that Windows uses, and I can add this to my canvas and close out. If ever I need to add another table, I can just simply right click and say add new table. I can create a new table. If I want to just add a table, then I can come in and add whichever ones that are needed here. Now in this case, I'm going to scroll up just a little bit because I have a relationship with a table to itself, and I'm going to scroll over just a little bit so we can see the whole entire image very clearly. Now in this case, and I'm going to close this other window. We'll look at how we can get into it. What we have here, we can see that we have lines between tables, and we have this recursive relationship between the employees table and itself. Let's start with what we're going to do first, which is we're going to join the employees table to the employee territories table. I can click on that link. Once I click on it, notice that it's showing me in the tooltip that there is a relationship, an FK underscore employee territories underscore employees between those two tables. This is indicating that we have a primary key in the employees table, and it's being joined to the employee territories, even though it's part of the primary key, using a foreign key relationship. So it's establishing the connection based off of that foreign key relationship from the employees table to that employee territories. Now we'll get into foreign key relationships because, in some cases those are very important for our data integrity. They ensure that if I have data in one table, if I try to remove data from another table, that based off the constraints we put in place, whether if I delete it from one table, it's going to wipe out everything in the other table, or if I delete it from one table, it's going to enforce that I can't delete it unless I remove all the other relationships and do it first, and will result in some type of error. So we'll get into that later in the semester. Right now, we are going to look at that in more depth. So if I want to go ahead and do a right click, I have the ability to, once I'm on that relationship and I have it highlighted, to look at the properties. And this is going to bring up a dialog that I can select the table and column specifications. So if I can't see right away what that relationship is, because it doesn't have to be on the same named field, in some cases based off of designs or the fact that you purchase solutions, you may have data in an employee ID field that essentially is the same kind of data in a reports to field. And you wouldn't necessarily know that there is a similar type thing going on unless they were related and you can see what the actual relationships are here. You would have to know that that data is the same. In this case, we have the relationship that's telling us the employee territories on the employee ID, the employees on the employee ID field. Now, if we click on our employee territories, this is going to be the second one that we join to the third table. If I click on that, expand the tables and columns, it's going to tell me that employee territories on the territory ID is pretty much a foreign key relationship to the territories, which has the territory ID as its primary key, and we can join and use that foreign key association as well. We also have this recursive relationship, so to speak, where we have the employee ID on the employees table, and we have the reports to down here, which means that it essentially has the same employee ID, and we can join this table to itself in order to get maybe the employee's supervisor information out, or manager information, or however you want to term that. Because this is who that employee reports to, then we can get the information for that particular employee. So let's go ahead and let's try to join first our employees to the employee territories. Then we'll go ahead and factor in our territories, and then we'll add as a last the employees table, which is essentially the self-join, where we can join a table to itself. So starting over here, if we are not sure that we're using NorthWinds, we can always go ahead and add the used NorthWinds, because we don't necessarily have the option to select it from a pick list. Once I do that, it's going to be set at NorthWinds. I can go ahead and start. Typically, we start by adding everything that we need from the first table, make sure that that query is working. So we would add any fields that we would want from the first table. We would want to add any filter conditions from that first table, and then go ahead and put in any order by with the fields from the first table. So in the first table, I am going to select, and this is going to be essentially the employee ID that I'm putting in. And I'm going to go to the next line to just fill in the table so I can get more of my IntelliSense popping in here so I don't have to type as much. And this is going to be the first name, the last name, the title, and the reports too. Now I'm going to go ahead and only put this on one line or two lines for the table column list. Generally, you would go through and put them line by line by line, but I also want to show queries down below, and to facilitate this particular video, I'm going to just kind of condense the query instead of putting each column on a single line. Typically, you would go through and put each column on a single line. Now, this is from my DBO employees. I'm not going to add a filter condition yet. We'll do that later on, and I'm just going to go ahead and order by the last name, first name, and I want this in ascending order. And I can go ahead now and run this query, make sure that it executes and everything coming back seems to meet my first query condition before I start introducing that second table in. If I just start adding the second table in without making sure that the first one runs, then I could be causing more issues for myself. The next thing that we want to do is we have our employee territories, and we really want to pick up our territory ID from our employee territories. So that's going to be something that we want to add to our column list here. Territory ID. And I also then want to put in my join condition. So I'm going to tab in. This is going to be inner join, and we're going to be inner joining the DBO.employee territories. And we want to specify this on what is the field between the two tables. We've already seen that the employees.employee ID is equal to the employee territories dot employee ID. Once we do that, notice that we have an issue with our employee ID because the employee ID is in both tables, and we have to specify which table we want to select that from. Now we can always add and return the column from both tables, but that doesn't make sense because they both have the same data in it because of the condition that we've established that we have an employee ID where we have this one matching this one. That's where we're including all the data, and we can specify just one of the two in our result set, and it really doesn't matter which one we pick. I'm just going to go ahead and paste in the employees, and when I run this, then I should be able to see that I have a territory ID involved. Now if I left off the territory, let me come in out, and I run this query without it, notice that I have multiple rows, but it's not really intuitive why I have multiple rows. Well, that's because I've joined it, and for each person, they have multiple territory IDs that they're covering. So this is basically going to bring in every territory for every person and their title and their last name and who they report to and their employee ID for each row. So we've gone ahead, we've done our first join. The next thing we want to do, going back to our diagram, is to bring in our territories. And we really care about our territory description because that's going to give us more information about, well, what is the area that they really cover? What does that territory really reflect? So I can go ahead and come back and add my join, because I want to do the join first so that I can make sure that I can select, because I'm not very good speller and territories is a little challenging for me. I can go ahead and do my inner join on my DBO.territories. And in this case, this is going to be on my employee territories. And it doesn't matter if I specify the territories or the employee territories first. I just need to specify both of them in this on condition. I usually use the one that is the table that is already in the relation before I'm adding a new one, but it doesn't really matter. So this is going to be territory ID is equal to the territories dot territory ID. Again, once we put that join condition in, because we have the territory ID in both of the tables, I need to specify where this is coming from. And I'm just going to specify in this case that it's coming from the employee's territory. And move this to the next line so that we can see it. Now when I run this, I should see that I have the territories, but I don't have the name yet. I need to add my name, and this is going to be the territory's description. Now when I run it, I should see that I have the name associated to that particular territory ID that has been added to my results. Now the last thing that we want to do is we want to bring in the manager for the employee. So we have our employee here, this Stephen Buchanan, but who does he report to? And let's go ahead and do that by coming in and adding one more relationship. And this is going to be inner join dbo.employees on, and this is going to be the employees dot employee ID equal to employees dot reports to. Now if you're looking at this, we got a big problem here, and we're going to address that in the next video when we take a look at aliases.